Hi, my name is Rachel Royzer, a high school junior and the founder of Explore Neuro, a website I created to provide an accessible and educational platform to spread knowledge on neuroscience and related fields. Today we will be talking with attorney Lawrence Berliner about his work as a special education and disability law attorney. Mr. Berliner has been working as an attorney for over 30 years, committed to advocating for children and adults with disabilities. Welcome, Attorney Berliner. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited that the younger generation is picking up the cause and you're very interested in this field. It's nice to know that I'm not alone.
Thank you. So to start off, can you tell a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, I've been doing this for about 37 years, so thank you for making me feel 5 years younger. I'm an attorney in the field of special education law, disability, civil rights law. Much of my practice is focused on the rights of children with special needs, often who require special education, occasionally Section 504 plans. I'll come back to those two laws. I do represent young adults with disabilities because young children do grow up. And often they encounter problems going off to college, so I help many college students. I've even helped a medical student a few years back, so sometimes these are lifelong issues that affect you in elementary school, secondary school, college, postgraduate, and in one case, a soon-to-be medical doctor. He did eventually graduate. I primarily work off three federal laws. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was the first federal civil rights law for people with disabilities. It was passed in 1973, but the regulations never took effect until 1980. And it took a lot of civil rights demonstrations by people with disabilities during that period of time to get what was then the federal agency known as HEW, that stood for Health, Education, and Welfare, to finally get those regulations out in what's called the Federal Register, which is the official publication of the federal government. And so the regulations have been on the books, modified periodically since 1980. A couple of years later, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, now known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, was passed by Congress. And that created a civil rights to a right to education. Many states, other than Connecticut, New York, and a few other states in the area, often would exclude children with disabilities from public schools because they couldn't profit from public education. There was a law, I think it was down in Alabama or Mississippi, where parents could be imprisoned for sending their children to public schools because the presence of a child with a disability in a public school setting was, quote, disgusting, end quote. So we had the Education for All Handicapped Children Act creating a civil rights to a public education, a free, appropriate public education is what it's called. Then in 1990, we passed through Congress a lot of advocates. I will take a very minor role because there were thousands and thousands and thousands of advocates for the Americans with Disabilities Act. I did a lot of work stateside here in Connecticut because Lowell Weicker at the time, before he lost his Senate seat, was one of the original architects of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that was in 1988. He lost that election, but a lot of the original work was done by his committee, which was the HELP Committee, which stands for Health, Education, Labor, and Pension. And so he was a proponent. I worked very closely with his staff at the time. I was with a state agency called the Office of Protection Advocacy for Persons with Disabilities. And I was a general counsel for the agency. And we worked closely with Lowell Weicker's office, later on Senator Lieberman, Senator Dodd. Senator Dodd was very instrumental in passing another law called the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1988. to modify or overturn some Supreme Court decisions that were misinterpreting the federal civil rights law. So I sort of fell into this field of law kind of by accident. I was looking for a job. I was out of law school, gainfully unemployed, working part-time for the judicial department as a clerk in the New Haven Superior Court. And I was applying for jobs. I took many exams, including state exams. And one day I got a letter offering me an interview with the State Protection Advocacy Office. So I had to go back and find out more about the agency. And I learned that they were doing the civil rights work here in Connecticut for people with disabilities. They offered me a job. I stayed with the agency for almost 17 years, where I honed my skills, learned the tools of the trade, so to speak. And then an opportunity came along about just about 20 years ago, where I could go off into the world of private law practice. And I was with a private law firm for quite a few years. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, I decided to set up my own practice, doing pretty much what I started at the Protection and Advocacy Office, advocating for the rights of children, young adults with disabilities, pursuing special education claims, claims of discrimination in the college setting, occasionally housing discrimination, and enjoying pretty much what I do each day and trying to make a difference in the life of a young child, or not so young child as the case may be, and their family, so they have barriers to their education removed, so they can demonstrate what I call manifestations of their ability rather than manifestations of their disability. The biggest disability out there is prejudice and ignorance, where people presume people with disabilities cannot do something. They assume they can't do anything. And as far as I'm concerned, the sky is the limit for a person with a disability, just like the sky is the limit for a person without a disability. And the only limitations out there should be self-imposed limitations, not artificial limitations imposed by society, or somebody says you have an IQ score of X and therefore you're not going to college. Or you have a disability and the only thing you should do is bag groceries in a local supermarket. I always advise my clients, their parents, aim high, aim very high. Maybe it'll achieve those goals, but if you don't aim high, the low-hanging fruit will materialize, but it's whether you'll achieve those high goals. I have litigated a lot of cases administratively in the courts. I have been involved with some very significant Supreme Court decisions here in Connecticut. I'm very proud of the work I do. I'm proud of the accomplishments when I know what they are, because often I know the beginning, sometimes the middle of a story, but rarely do I see the end. But every so often, a former client of mine will say, my son or daughter graduated from high school or college, or they had this job, and I just wanted to let you know that you were there to make a difference. And that's what I try to do.
Yeah, that's great. So going back a little on the history of the laws, I saw on your website, you had an article talking about the 30th anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act.
Yes, I did. Yes.
Yeah, so what, you wrote that although it's important to recognize the significance, there's still work ahead. So how protective are current laws, and how do you think they can still be improved?
Well, as I said a moment ago, the biggest disability out there is ignorance and prejudice, and we can pass all the laws, creating all the civil rights laws in the world for any protected group, any group that has been held back because of some artificial reason like race, creed, sex, national origin, religion, disability. There are other categories. I don't want to limit it to that. Gender identity is another area that is often misunderstood. But what we can't do is make people get rid of their prejudices. And I don't like you because of your race, creed, sex, national origin, whatever. We have to figure out a better way to understand, as much as we are different, we're all alike at the same time. We all have two eyes, we have two ears, we walk on 2 feet, we have 10 fingers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We may be different at the same time. We all have different backgrounds. We may have come from a different country. We may speak a different language. But at the end of the day, we're all the same. If we're parents, we want what's best for our children. If you're the child, you want to dream big, and hopefully your parents will support you to help you, accomplish those dreams and those goals in life. We all want to live in a safe, comfortable home. We want to have health care and nutrition, things that many of us have, and unfortunately many more do not have. So how do we improve? Well, I could say we could improve upon the Americans with Disabilities Act by having employers more responsive to the needs of prospective employees with disabilities. We have a national economy that has an unemployment rate of about 8-10%, pick a number, it doesn't really matter. But the unemployment rate within the community of adults with disability is about 65%. So that's why it doesn't matter whether the national rate is 8 or 10%, because adults with disabilities are often underemployed or not employed at all. And it frustrates me because we as a society spend tens of billions of dollars, that's with a B, probably about 10, 20, 30, 40 billion dollars, depending on what pot of money it's coming from in the federal treasury, to promote the rights of people with disabilities. We fund special education. We fund the Birth to 3 program, which is the precursor to special education. We fund vocational rehabilitation programs. We have Medicaid waivers that promote the independence of people with disabilities. And I would like to feel at the end of the day that somebody could submit a job application and not have somebody look askance at them and say, because you have a disability, you're automatically not qualified. And there are rare exceptions. I mean, if you are unable to drive a car, for example, and having a driver's license is an essential job requirement, I can understand that. But if you have a driver's license as an artificial job requirement, and I did have that many years ago. I represented a young man who was blind, who wanted to work for a state agency, and they would not hire him because he didn't have a driver's license and he was blind. And I looked at the essential job requirement. His job is to sit in an office at a state agency and answer the phone and do what are called intakes. So when somebody called, he had a form to fill out. Back then it was done manually, now it's by computer. And he didn't have to go anywhere. He didn't have to travel anywhere, but they refused to hire him, the state agency, because he did not have a driver's license. So we challenged that agency's decision and got him a very nice settlement, eventually a job with a different state agency. And I think of that young man many, many years later, and he was perfectly capable of doing the job, but the reason he didn't get the job is he didn't have a driver's license. And that's blatant discrimination, especially when the agency wrote in writing, the reason we are not hiring you is because of your disability and the fact you don't have a driver's license. So rarely do you get that in writing. So how do you improve these laws? We understand that people with disabilities have value to our society. I used to teach a law school class at Quinnipiac University, and I would, on disability law, pretty much what I do every day. And I would start that class talking about Napoleon. I would talk about Alexander the Great. I would talk about all these historical figures And until I got to Stevie Wonder, until I got to Marlee Matlin, the actress, and many other contemporary people with disabilities in our society, suddenly the class clicked, because no one was thinking about Alexander the Great having a disability. We know him as a military, conqueror. We don't. The same thing with Napoleon. And the more I got into the 20th and 21st century with more contemporary characters and personalities, suddenly the class realized how many people with disabilities have made a major impact on our lives without realizing they had disabilities. We had a president in the 1940s. Nobody knew he had a disability. Well, we were in the pre-television era age, and President Roosevelt did his best to mask his physical disability. It was brought on by polio, but didn't affect his ability to be president. Marlee Matlin, a wonderful actress, is hearing impaired, but her inability to hear doesn't affect her ability to be a great actress. Stevie Wonder, who's visually impaired, wonderful musician, at least I'm maybe dating myself, but it goes on that people with disabilities add value to our society. Unfortunately, society in return doesn't always value people with disabilities. And that is how the law could be improved, probably through education, possible tweaks in the law through the legislative process, and most important, just understanding that disability is a natural occurrence in our life. We have about maybe 15, 17, 18% of our overall population have disabilities in some form or another. Most people with disabilities are quite capable and talented if somebody will give them that chance. There was an organization called the Jobs Accommodation Network. I think they're out of Massachusetts, which is a resource for employers and applicants for employment. And a number of years ago, they published a very interesting study that on the cost of reasonable accommodations in a place of employment. And the average cost to an employer in a private business was this absolutely remarkable number of $100. On average, it cost an employer about $100 to provide an accommodation to a person with a disability. And that might be widening a door, putting some bricks under a desk to raise up the level 6-8 inches so somebody in a wheelchair can slide under it. Maybe it's buying a headphone for somebody who might have a hearing impairment. Because a lot of the costs are intangible. Some of the costs are like a schedule change. I don't drive, but I take a bus, and the time my bus will arrive at work, I'm going to be 15 minutes late. So it would be, rather than being late, would it be possible for me to arrive 15 minutes later because of the bus schedule, and I'll leave 15 minutes later, or I'll shorten my lunch hour by 15 minutes. What does that cost an employer? Nothing. So a lot of the accommodations don't cost a nickel, but the ones that do cost something, on average, a few years ago, the Jobs Accommodation Network found it cost about $100. And I would imagine that most employers can afford that $100. So attitude towards people with disabilities, recognizing the value that they add to our society, and having them included in our society, starting with our schools, starting with colleges, starting with places of employment, our community. We're just like with other civil rights law, we're better. We're better than 100 years ago. We're better than where we were 50 years ago. We're better than we were 25 years ago. But even though we have fought the battles, there are other battles that need to be fought to ensure that these rights, whatever the rights are meaningful. And I often encounter parents and sometimes young adults who are frustrated, and they've said words to the effect, when Congress passes a law, isn't it our obligation to obey the law? I said, yes, it is, but these are not criminal laws. You know, it's not like you're speeding on the highway and you get pulled over by the state trooper and you complain that you got pulled over even though you're going 80 miles an hour and the speed limit was 55. These are civil rights laws that only work if people who are the subject and the beneficiaries of these laws act on their rights. I have represented college students, for example, whose professor would not accommodate them, even though they had a well-documented disability and a well-crafted plan of accommodations. And I'd have to explain, you know, these professors are going to get away with this for as long as they're going to get away with it, unless you stand up for yourself and fight back. And we fought back in that case with filing what's called an OCR complaint, an Office of Civil Rights complaint, with the US Department of Education. And that university had to back down and they had to provide my client with some remedies. So these laws work only because parents of minor children and young adults over the age of 18 know the rights and are acting on the rights. And when it comes to young children, I rely heavily on the parents for special education or Section 504 cases, because I rarely have an 8-year-old come into my office and say, I need a reading program and an Orton Gillingham trained teacher. The parents come in and say, my child can't read. And that's what parents need to do. It's up to me to figure out how, where, and why the child isn't reading, and to figure out what kind of supports he or she will need. Because without these basic building blocks, which start the day after you were born, these are the skills you're going to take into life. You know, we're learning we go to school not for the sake of going to school. We want to learn something. You're in high school, I think you said.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're preparing for this stage in your life, but in a year or so, you're going to prepare for another stage of your life, hopefully going off to college. So everything you learn now, academically, socially, independence, all of that's important. And eventually you're going to be on your own. And you want to make sure that you have a solid down payment at each next step in your life, whether you're a little child going into preschool, elementary school, secondary school, college, on and on. Because all of these skills are important. And when you have splintered skills, you're building skills on a soft foundation, or a foundation that has many holes in it. That's going to affect your success, your trajectory in life. Many years ago, there was I think it's the Prime Minister of Bermuda, or the Governor General of Bermuda, gave a speech at a school for children with learning disabilities. I think it was Kildonan or Marblewood, one of those two schools. And he said something I thought was pretty profound. It's your attitude in life that will determine your altitude in life. And I like hearing that, because sometimes it comes from here. You have to believe in yourself. It's not what these civil rights laws. You have to believe you have the capacity to go to college. You have to believe in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, who does? I mean, I can tell you what a smart person you are and how talented you are, but it has to come from you. You also have to believe that as well.
So to go specifically back into the cases and parents, what's the first thing a parent should do if they suspect their child has special needs, and when do they go and seek an attorney?
Well, the first thing to do is not to go into denial. That's a natural condition, and a lot of people will avoid or deny something. You know, we metaphorically stick our head in the sand and hope the problem goes away. And if a parent is noticing, sometimes parents have their very first child and they don't have a reference point. They don't have a sibling, a nephew or a niece or a next door neighbor. This is their first. But when you have a parent with a second child, suddenly they have a yardstick. You know, they can measure that child against another benchmark. So when parents suspect, and until it's formally diagnosed or evaluated, we're suspecting a disability, or sometimes it's developmental. The child will just grow out of it. Give them a little time, a little extra support, they'll grow out of it. But if that doesn't happen, parents should consult their pediatrician, and hopefully they have a good pediatrician, not one just that's there to give you shots and fill out the blue health forms with height, weight, and up-to-date immunization, but somebody who understands the developmental progressions and can key into the feelings, because often parents have feelings, and key into the feelings of parents, and not be dismissive. Mommy, stop being hysterical. Parents have wisdom and intuition because they see their child in multiple settings. And I tell parents, if you have that little feeling in the pit of your stomach, if there's a voice talking to you at the back of your head, don't dismiss that feeling and don't talk yourself out of that voice. So if the pediatrician suspects something is going on, it could be medical, it could be non-medical. If it's medical, the pediatrician might make a referral to a medical specialist, maybe a neurologist or some other type of specialist. If it's education, often it's a school psychologist or a private clinical psychologist, sometimes a speech and language pathologist, sometimes an occupational therapist or a physical therapist, who are called upon to do an observation and formal assessments. Because somebody who has the right kind of training, experience, and that critical eye or ear, as the case may be, and can see something that you as a parent you may see but not fully understand, or may not see it at all. And then that sort of starts that journey towards whatever the goal is. If the goal is to identify a child with having a need for special education, that's the goal. And we write what are called individual education plans, or IEPs, with goals and objectives, services, all designed to help support the student in the areas of identified weakness, and to provide a special education program and placement, and something called related services, which could be counseling, speech and language services, physical therapy, occupational therapy. There are many other related services. And so a parent should be able to look back in the month of June to the month of September and say, those were the gaps at the beginning of the school year. And here we are at the end, except for this past school year, which I don't ever want to repeat, but and say, yeah, okay, we're seeing the progress, the gaps are closing. It's not like we're not learning anything, we're not acquiring skills. And the skills to be acquired are those that are going to take the student into the next step of their lives, academically, socially, emotionally. If they're old enough, usually high school students have what's called a transition plan. And the transition plan is designed to help students develop skills that they will need to further their education, hopefully going to college, or if not going to college, some other kind of post-secondary education, to further their skills in becoming competitive employed, or if not, identifying what kind of supports they need to become employed, and if necessary, independent living, unless they are fully capable of driving, cooking, money management, maintaining an apartment, knowing when to call 211 versus 911. If they take medication, they can do that independently. Being good self-advocates, so they understand I need help, and they know where to go for help. All of those are if they're going off to college, organizational skills, planning skills, independent skills, because college, there are no IEPs, there are no assistant principals in in college. You don't get a detention for skipping class in college, unlike high school. You may get an F, or the professor is not going to chase you down because the paper is overdue. Unlike high school, somebody's going to say in Power School you have all these missing assignments, and we'll give you an extra day or a week to make them up. So when you get to college, most of the time students are 18 and over. That's the age of majority, and students are treated as fully formed adults even though they are 18. I always ask, what's the difference between a student who's 17 years and 364 days old and a student who's 17 years and 365 days old? Well, nothing, except the law recognizes the second student as being an adult, and the first student is still a minor child. So it's very, very important, particularly high school students, but leading all the way up to high school, that students have all those basic foundational skills, built on a solid framework. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's going to show up. The weaknesses, the gaps are going to show up later in life.
Yeah, so talking about specifically in current events with the pandemic, how have educational rights and accommodations changed with like online school, or how they're doing social distancing?
Well, I wish I had a complete answer. I can tell you that the laws haven't changed. In the field of special education, the right to receive a free, appropriate public education, which is the legal standard for special education, hasn't changed. Congress didn't repeal the law. The Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education didn't modify the law by granting exemptions. The State Department of Education hasn't granted any waivers. So what changed? And the answer is everything. Whether you're in regular education, special education, everything changed. We've gone from in-person instruction to online instruction. Most of my clients who attend public schools, and I have 3 notable exceptions, their children had problems with the online instruction in small, medium, and very large ways. I had 3 students that actually enjoyed the online instruction and were benefiting from the academic instruction because they didn't have to deal with the social drama that was going on in their school, the bullying, the harassment, and they could focus entirely on their studies. So most of my other clients, I had one mom call me up. My son has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, sometimes known as ADHD or ADD in some cases. In class, the teacher and others were able to keep him focused. And he was working at home. His mom, if she got 15, maybe 20 minutes in front of the computer, that was a lot. There was something toxic about the computer. It overloaded him in such a way that he was not functional. Well, the parents weren't the teachers, the parents weren't the psychologists, the parents were not the classroom aide, the parents were not the behaviorists. They were parents, and parents do what parents do, and they did the best they could. So the school's critical of the parents for not making their son available. He was available, he just wouldn't sit for more than 15, 20 minutes. I had another client whose son had autism with some behavioral issues. And the school counselor wanted to do therapy through the computer. The problem was my client didn't like the school counselor. So whenever the mom would make him available online in front of the computer, and as soon as the school counselor arrived, he would politely get up and leave. Well, what's his mom supposed to do? Force him to, it's not her job. So what happened is the instruction changed, and in many cases, the schools were not taking data in regular education or on special education IEP goals. And so we don't really know today, right now today as we speak, in many cases, whether the student has regressed or maintained skills. And if they regress, can we recoup those skills in a short amount of time, maybe a week or two or three, some remedial, everybody's behind a little bit after the regular summer vacation. What happens when you haven't been in school for 6 months? So we have a lot of situations where we're starting this school year without any solid data as to where the student was the day before the schools closed. So that changed. And then we have these school reopening plans. And I don't know if you are experienced this, maybe you are. Some schools have reopened completely. Some are on a hybrid model, 2 days in, 3 days off, 3 days in, 2 days off. New Haven Public Schools is doing online instruction for about a month before they reopen schools. And then you see anecdotally in the paper, there was even one in Stamford the other day, somebody comes to school with a COVID-19 diagnosis, the teacher, the child, somebody else, they close the school. And that's happening sporadically so far, but it is happening. High schools in Naugatuck were closed. I think Still Meadow and Stamford was closed the other day. I forget where the school was. It was the John F. Kennedy Middle School somewhere in Connecticut was closed. And a lot of schools are facing this right now today. So is that the new normal? We're going to go to school and not go to school. We're going to go back to school. We're going to be closed again. Back in March, a lot of the public schools were not ready for online learning. They just figured, oh, this will pass in a couple of weeks and we'll be back in school. Well, that didn't happen. The other side of that coin were the private special ed schools, because many of my clients go to private special ed schools. And to my surprise, the private special ed schools did a really good job of converting from in-person instruction to online instruction. All of my clients that I was aware of had full day, not a couple hours a day. Most of my clients were with their classmates and their teacher working on the same curriculum. Somebody referred to it as like a Brady Bunch computer screen. So you had the teacher and 10 students or whatever the number were, and they were actively engaged throughout the day. One private school had school from 8:30 to 2:30 with breaks built in. And that student, or those students, or many, had a full day. The only thing that physically changed was the location. So instead of going to school, they went to their computer where that was located. Were they learning? In most cases, yes, but I'm sure there are exceptions to that. And the question I've been struggling with, if the private school, it's the same technology, it's similar teaching techniques. And it doesn't matter whether they were special needs private schools or regular private schools. The anecdotal information I had was there were much fewer problems with the private schools converting from in-person instruction to online instruction. They had the technology, they had the capability, and they had the students actively engaged, and they were taking data and issuing grades and tests and quizzes and group projects, one-to-one time with the students if necessary. It's in effect staying after school, but staying after school was working on the computer, not physically staying after school. So those were changes that occurred. And here we are at the beginning of the 2021 school year, and I don't know exactly where we are because some schools just started this week, some started last week, some schools started the week before. I just had a PPT meeting, a pupil planning team meeting this morning, and so they wanted to review the student's progress. He's been in school all of 2 days. I said, well, why do we have to review the student's progress? He just started. There's not, did he take a test? Was he absent for 2 days? All you can say, he was there for 2 days. There was no work, there was no spelling test, there was no math test, but they had to review his progress after 2 days. So that's one student who started this week. I have a couple others that started last week and some the week before. So it's a new era. I have never seen anything like this in my entire career. And I hope all of us will get past this COVID-19, because I think just about everybody's tired of it.
Going back to, you were saying PPT meeting, could you explain what those are and the purpose?
Certainly. In federal law, they're called IEP meetings. We call them PPT meetings. New York State calls them CSE meetings. CSE stands for Committee on Special Education. Connecticut, we call them pupil planning team meetings. And parents and students, if they want to be, are part of a team of educators, administrators, who sit in a meeting format to discuss a referral to special education. Maybe the student is struggling in reading or math, or the student has social issues that are affecting their education. And it starts with a referral. A parent can make a referral, a pediatrician can make a referral, school staff can make a referral. And the referral to a PPT meeting is to determine whether or not the student might qualify for special education. And how do we determine whether a student might qualify? Often parents have evaluations or letters from the pediatrician or work samples or other sources of information. Certainly the teachers do. And we might agree that we need to do more formal assessments. Maybe the school psychologist needs to do some cognitive testing, so-called IQ testing, or achievement testing. Or maybe we need the occupational therapist to evaluate sensory issues or fine motor issues, or the speech and language pathologist to evaluate communication issues. And if we find an adverse impact upon education based upon all the information, parent input, evaluations, work samples, whatever the source of information is and where it's coming from, then we have to identify a primary disability. And we have 14 primary disabilities in Connecticut. There are 13 in federal law. We have a 14th called dyslexia. So does a child have autism, dyslexia, other health impairment, orthopedic impairment, intellectual disabilities, on and on and on. And so we establish eligibility. Now, we don't write an IEP based upon what box is checked off for eligibility. We discuss the student's strengths and the weaknesses. We write goals and objectives to address areas of weakness. So if the child is struggling in reading but not math, we're going to have reading goals and objectives. If the student is struggling with language, we're going to have some speech and language goals and objectives. If the student has some issues with social pragmatics, or they just have self-esteem issues, we're going to have some counseling goals and objectives. And we put all this together in a document that's called an IEP. That's an individual education plan. And the IEP is an educational blueprint. It's a roadmap of how the student is going to spend his or her school day, school week, school year. And at the end of a year, we review the IEP and determine whether the child has made meaningful progress. If they've made meaningful progress, they have received what's called a free appropriate public education. Free appropriate public education is the legal equation. That's sort of the skeletal backbone of the special ed law. Free is without direct costs to the family. Public and education is what the school district is supposed to provide. And we're often disagreeing or arguing over the word appropriate. Appropriate was never defined by Congress. So some people thought appropriate meant Webster's dictionary. Whatever my child needs, that's appropriate. And that's a parent speaking. But unfortunately, the US Supreme Court got a hold of the law in 1982 and later in 2017, and basically said appropriate isn't everything. They looked at whether the IEP was based upon the child's unique needs, not what's available in the building or the school district. Were the IEP goals and objectives designed to confer meaningful educational benefit on the child? In other words, they know more today than yesterday. Were the procedures, these are the rights, procedural safeguards, respected? And later on in 2017, words like robust were added. Is it a robust IEP? So we want to aim high with the goals and objectives, not aim low. And we want students to achieve as much as they possibly can, not as little as possible, with an IEP, with supports, with specialized services, with counseling, related services, OT, PT, speech and language, because all of this, as I said before, is designed to get the student to that next step in life, from preschool to elementary school to middle school to secondary, high school, and post-secondary, like college, community college, vocational training, and independent living. Because the goal, it's in the law, the goal of special education is to prepare students to further their education, become competitively employed, and if necessary, develop independent living skills. That's the eye on the prize. Well, isn't that what we want for any high school graduate? And of course, the answer is yes, but here we have a congressional mandate clearly stating we want this for students with disabilities, so they are independent rather than dependent. So they're contributing to society rather than being not contributing to society, that they're achieving, the promise of happiness, fulfillment, whatever we want to do in life, and they're not being, artificially set back because somebody said, you're not worth it, you're not going to amount to anything. And I do have, even to this day, parents saying, why don't they believe in my son or my daughter? I said, the problem is they don't have an ownership interest in your child's success, because we can all think about teachers, even you, and I certainly can, and I've been out of high school for a long time, teachers that have made a mark in our lives, a meaningful difference. And we can also think about those teachers that we wish we never had, because they were going through the motions and not doing anything that added value to our life or added knowledge. And I still talk about my English teacher from high school, Rose Gay, and how excellent she was, and she demanded nothing less than excellence from her students. Mm-hmm. And I have been out of high school for all too long, but that one teacher and a couple of others, really made a mark on my psyche, my knowledge. And I remember writing her a letter when I was in college, just thanking her for demanding excellence in that English class that I had, because her excellence prepared me for the rigors of going from high school English to college literature and English. And I actually learned a lot of things, and it added to my enjoyment, and counterbalanced that were many other teachers who I could have, if I could wipe them from my memory, I would, but they're permanently there as well, the good with the bad, So what we want for all of our children, what you want for yourself, is to be able to succeed in life, with the support of yourself when you're old enough, the support of your family, most important, support of your teachers and any other people who are in your life, socially, religiously, wherever you're seeking support and guidance. Because as Hillary Clinton once said, it does take a village to raise a child, and that village, is defined uniquely for each child. It's most definitely with the parents, but you have your friends, you have others that you hang out with, and you want to, take advantage of all these opportunities, so you have those skills that you need, develop an understanding that you'll need to navigate the written rules of life, and more specifically, the unwritten rules of life, where you're expected to, be a young adult and act like a young adult, not immature, and do young adult things and study hard and, achieve great and wonderful things, because that's what you want to do, and that's what your parents want to do, and your siblings and cousins and aunts and uncles, who's ever in your life. And teachers too. Sometimes teachers, care about what you do.
So I guess just to summarize, what is the most challenging aspect of your job, and what is the most fulfilling?
Well, I'll answer the second one first. Is the most fulfilling part of my, well, first, I don't consider it a job. Some people said it sounds like it's a calling. I said, I don't know. Maybe it is. I gain fulfillment knowing I have, in some small, medium, or large way, made a meaningful difference in the life of a child and their family. I have a Christmas card in my office that I received about 8, maybe 9 years ago. And it was from a child who was 8 years old. And he was learning absolutely nothing in public schools, and we arranged for an out-of-district placement for him. And why did I get the Christmas card? Because that month was the first time he learned how to write his name. And he was so happy, his mom was so happy he was in this private out-of-district placement that they sent me a Christmas card, and there is his name. He printed his name for the very first time in his life. He's 8 years old. Mm. And anytime I sort of lose sight of what I'm doing, I have a bad day at work or I just get overwhelmed, I look at that Christmas card, I open it up, and there's the young boy's name written out for the first time. That's an example of the fulfillment. Or when I get an email from one of my clients that my son just graduated from college this year or last year. We each had 2 sons, they each graduated, and you were there to make a difference. When I go to a high school graduation, and I've seen students that I picked up in middle school that were going absolutely nowhere and going nowhere fast, graduating from high school and going off to college, that's fulfilling. Mm-hmm. When I know a student is competitively employed, when I know a student is happy, when I read about somebody's accomplishment, if I don't get this information directly, that brings fulfillment, joy, happiness to me, because I learned a long time ago that we're here to make a meaningful difference in the lives of the clients we're representing. And if we're not making a meaningful difference in the lives of the clients that I'm representing, then I should do something else. So the other part of your question is, what's so frustrating? Well, what's frustrating to me is the need that's out there, and how few resources are out there to meet the needs of families who struggle in understanding their child's issues. I have quite a few clients who have come from other countries. Their culture is different. Their language is different. They're more fearful of the government than we are here, and they're afraid. And they don't know what to do, and they don't know where the resources are. And sometimes the resources are not translated into whatever language they speak. Or, as I said, they're fearful of the government. Their status here in America may be questionable, maybe even illegal, and they're afraid if they push back, they might be deported. And they come into my office through a variety of ways. And sometimes I can help them. Sometimes I can allay their concerns. Sometimes I can represent them. There is an organization that provides small grants to pay for the legal fees that I charge a lot, reduce my fees for people who have that organization's grant. When I first started doing this well over 30 years ago, there were a lot of lawyers at my agency. We had about 3 or 4. Legal Aid had a lot of lawyers doing special education. And there were quite a few other private not-for-profit organizations doing this kind of work. And then there were a handful of private attorneys doing this kind of work. And as time passes on, people retire, they move away. Unfortunately, some people have passed away. The legal aid lawyers are virtually non-existent because there are just too many demands on legal aid and too few grant dollars, federal grant funding, private dollars to support what they're doing. My state agency no longer exists. It's a much smaller private not-for-profit organization. I don't find many law students calling me and say, can I learn more about special ed law? Occasionally I do. I had a law student actually call me about a month ago who was thinking about going into this area of the law. So I just looked up on his law school website to see if there was even a clinic that he could be part of. A lot of all law schools have civil clinics for the students to learn skills. So they had a tax clinic, they had a real estate clinic, a corporate, they had all the clinics except for disability law or special education. But what I found was there was a disability rights organization literally around the block from the law school. And I told that student, maybe, did you ever hear of that organization? Of course, the answer was no. I said, maybe you need to go around the block, go to the second floor of whatever the address was. And I said, why don't you introduce yourself? Maybe there's an internship. Maybe they can, use your interest in special ed law, disability law. So my frustration is on multiple levels. I wish schools were doing their job better than they are. If they were doing their job, I wouldn't have mine, but as you can see, I've been doing this for a long time, so there's no shortage of issues that I can make differences, but there is a shortage of people like me doing this kind of work. And as I said before, unless people are knowledgeable about their rights, unless they're acting on their rights, these laws don't enforce themselves. They only work because somebody is filing a complaint, somebody's requesting a referral to special education, somebody's asking the questions that need to be asked, and most important, they're not assuming everything's okay when they know in their heart they're not. And that's why knowledgeable parents are so vitally important. And for young people, young adults, high school students too, being knowledgeable about your rights, being knowledgeable of the resources, understanding where to go for help when you need help. All of that is going to contribute to success. And so there, as I said, my frustration is on multiple levels. I just wish I could figure out a way to do more than what I'm doing, but I'm a sole practitioner. We're only 24 hours in a day. I work 6 days a week, so I do take time off. I try, and I have a family, so I have to work balance family issues just like other families, other parents. And as I said, I try to make a difference. And if I'm not making a difference, that's frustrating for me. That doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Where we just hit a brick wall and we just can't move on beyond that. So I try to do my best in advocating for my clients, explaining what their rights are, getting outside evaluations in some cases, getting in-district placements that are more responsive to the child's needs, occasionally getting out-of-district placements at private special ed schools when the public school is not being responsive to the child's needs. And making sure that I try to get the word out as best I can. I'm starting next week, I'm doing a series of webinars, talking to you and getting information out to people that are viewing your webinar, your website. And I hope that there will be more people like you that have an interest in this field that will come up behind me, become teachers, become lawyers, advocates, just to help make our society better, because that's all we can do. We have many, many problems throughout our society, but fortunately there are many ways to find solutions. And some of that's legislation, some of that's litigation, some of that's advocacy, some of that's just plain vanilla common sense. And if we're all pulling in the same direction, we're going to make our society better and make sure that the lives of children with and without disabilities are such that they're properly prepared to take their rightful place in society. And when I try to explain to policymakers, elected officials, sometimes school administrators, You are dealing with our most precious natural resource, and that's the next generation. That's the next generation that are going to be lawyers, judges, business owners, doctors, healthcare professionals. And if we want them to take their rightful place in society, we have to prepare now and not have the elementary school principal say it's not my problem because the child goes off to middle school, and have the middle school principal say, not my problem, the child's now in high school, and then the high school principal's not my problem, it's now the parent's problem, which becomes society's problem. We want to make sure that at every stage of a child's life that they're properly prepared for that next stage, because there is a point in time we do leave at least public education, formal education. There is a time for many of us, not all of us, unfortunately, who go off to higher education, go to community college, four-year college, graduate school, professional schools, vocational schools. A lot of people think you just have to go to college. Well, college isn't for everybody. I can tell you, based upon what I pay my plumber, he makes a very good living. So sometimes we need to look at, vocational opportunities. If going to college is not the way to go, there are many ways to earn a good living. And when I see all kinds of people not being valued and not being, utilized to the extent of their capabilities, they're being underutilized, ignored, shunned aside. It bothers me, and as I said, I try to do my best every day. I try to make a difference in the lives of my clients every day, and I occasionally get that feedback that I've made a difference in their lives, and that's what I look forward to. As I said, sometimes I know how the story ends. Most of the time I don't, but it doesn't stop me from trying each and every day.
Yeah, I know your work is so inspiring, and so many people appreciate everything you do. So what would be like your last piece of advice that you would want to give people who are fighting for their rights, or parents fighting for their child's rights?
Well, I would start with don't give up, because when you give up, the other side wins. And that's why I said, if you have that little voice in the back of your head talking to you, you have that feeling in the pit of your stomach telling you something, act on it. It's very important that parents and their children know what their rights are, know where to go for help. Sometimes we're in a school setting and students just sort of suffer in silence and then come home from school and they unload on their parents. And the parents weren't in school and they have to figure out what happened in school. Communication is very important. Communication is a two-way street, to school and home, from home to school. It's not supposed to be an us versus them situation. We have some very dedicated professionals in public and private education at the elementary, secondary, and college level who genuinely care about the success of their students. And I try very hard not to make it personal. I try very hard not to make it an us versus them. But when you're involved with litigation, it is us versus them. I'm out to win. The other attorney is out to win. But most of the time, we are able to reach a compromise so everybody benefits. So the best piece of advice, is don't give up. Be knowledgeable. We live in a very exciting era of information. You can Google just about any question and come up with an answer. And so that's one of the benefits. There are a lot of detriments to the internet, but one of the benefits is there are a lot of resources out there on special education, on medicine, on reading, dyslexia, epilepsy, you name the topic. You're going to find an organization, the Epilepsy Foundation, the Association of this, the LDA, the Learning Disability. So, they're all over the internet. So parents, should not feel alone and suffer in silence, but educate themselves. Go on the internet, I was surprised. It's easy for me to say that, but I was surprised that in Connecticut, one of the wealthiest states in the nation, there are approximately 14% of our overall population that either does not have computers or does not have reliable internet service. And I said, this is Connecticut. This isn't some, rural part of America. This is not some part of America that has seen, better days because the factory closed or the mine closed or all the industry moved out. This is Connecticut. And here in Connecticut, approximately 14% of the households either do not have computers or reliable internet. And then suddenly in the middle of March, we went into online learning and nobody bothered to ask, do you have a computer? Do you have reliable internet? And in some cases, people would go to the libraries because they had computers and reliable internet, but the libraries closed. So, or if you went to Starbucks or some other place that had a Wi-Fi, you could go there, but they closed. So this COVID-19 virus has created a wake-up call on multiple levels. We saw how fragile our healthcare system is. We saw how fragile our education system is. We've seen how fragile our food supply can be. I mean, where people are hoarding, you go to the supermarket and the shelves are empty. I've never seen anything like this except, when we had a snowstorm where everybody goes out and panic buys, eggs, milk, bread, or something like that. But in a few days, the store shelves are stocked again. I'm absolutely flabbergasted in my lifetime, just when I think I've seen just about every single thing that could possibly be thrown at me in my lifetime. There's a whole new normal, so to speak. And our ability to adapt and adjust to that, whether it's online education, not accepting mediocrity. I have clients that call me in the past few months, the school is not doing X for my child. I said, see if you can get a private provider that will provide the speech and language services, the OT, the physical therapy, the counseling. And what that means is we have to be creative. We have to be creative. And that's another piece of advice. Don't accept what's out there. Think outside the box. Because doing more of the same that's not working and expecting a different outcome was a definition of insanity that was attributed to Albert Einstein. And assuming that was attributed to Albert Einstein, it's relevant today as it was whenever he supposedly said, those words. So we need to be knowledgeable about ourselves. We need to know how to get additional knowledge when we lack that knowledge. The internet is a great place, the local library, wherever the information is. Joining parent groups. Sometimes you have formal parents group that coalesce around, say, learning disabilities or intellectual disabilities. Not far from where you live, there was until the COVID-19, there was a group called the Pizza Moms, and they would meet once a week at a pizza place, and they would just share stories of what was going on in their child's lives and their lives. And sometimes the Moms Network, the parent network, is a good way to network and exchange information. This is what I did for my child. Maybe this will work for your child. Or I just spoke to Larry Berliner. I saw a webinar, or I saw your webinar. There's a whole bunch of information out there that if people could figure out how to access that on a regular, meaningful basis, they may not change anything except their knowledge, but when you're armed with knowledge, you can be a very powerful, forceful person to deal with. It's just, but unfortunately, people are not armed with knowledge, and as a result, they take, I have parents that say, what could I possibly know? I'm not the teacher. And I said, well, you know a lot. You know an awful lot. I said, who taught your child how to hold a spoon? Who taught your child how to walk? Who taught your child their first words? Who listened to your child read their first book to them? And then the parents will say, I guess I am the teacher. And I said, you will be a teacher for the rest of your life because you have knowledge, wisdom, and experience that you can impart on your son or daughter for as long as they want you to share that information. So these are things that parents need to value themselves. I affectionately give all of my clients a PhD in clinical parenting. They are experts on their children, and some parents need, just like children need to be empowered, and so do parents. Just like children need to believe in themselves, so do parents have to do that. And that's what we try to do to make sure that they are knowledgeable parents, they're effective advocates for their children are receiving the services that they need, and they're going from point A to point B in a meaningful way, a measurable way. And as I said, one standard is at the end of a school year, you look backwards and you can say, yeah, we made some progress here. I have a ways to go, but we made some progress. As opposed to this past year in particular, I don't know if there's been any progress. I have no way of knowing because the schools stopped issuing report cards. They stopped issuing IEP progress reports. The data collection stopped. So I asked my clients what was going on at home during this online instruction, because you were the teacher, you were the classroom aide, you were the monitor, and if you could better tell the school what was going on. They were learning, they weren't learning, they were on task, they were off task, we had a breakthrough, or we're still working on the same thing we did on the first day of online instruction, on the last day of online instruction. So it's a journey in life. The journey begins, I don't know when it ends, but if it ever ends, but it's a journey in life that we have to travel, because that's what we do as human beings. We're curious. We have a brain that's supposedly working and functional. We invent things. We cure things. We research things. And it's that drive to move forward that keeps us going. And when we lose that drive, we go backwards. And that's a lot of fear that's out there right now. Are we going with this COVID-19? Do we stop going forward? And that's why I said before, a lot of fissures in our society were exposed, whether it's the healthcare system, the financial system, places of employment, education, and we need to get back on track as soon as we can figure out, using our brains, what the solution is. The solution, I'm told, is a vaccine. That vaccine will be ready when it's ready, not when a politician declares it ready. We have hundreds of years of research in science behind us, and we know how to, especially with DNA analysis today and a lot of other technology, we can look into a virus and see what's going on, as opposed to treating the symptoms of a virus. And if this virus is as deadly as we believe it is, and it is quite deadly, unless and until it's controlled, we have a way to fight it, with medicine, vaccines. Unfortunately, we're going to be in this holding pattern that we are, with social distancing, with wearing masks, hand sanitizer, hybrid learning models, online instruction. And I can just imagine how you feel as a high school student when you're not part of your school community, when you're not going to your job every day to be with your friends, to be with the teachers, to work on the science experiment in the science lab, or if you're on the theater or music or whatever your enjoyment about school is, all taken away, and we need to get that back. So you're not good. I mean, I was this past June with all the high school graduations or non-graduation, I just felt so bad for these students, that the most exciting part, you've worked your entire life for this one thing, and that is, to get your awards, to get the accolades, to be validated, to get your diploma, and you're ready to go on to the next life. You have the dance, the prom, whatever it is, all gone, wiped out completely. And I feel badly for those students that this part of their life was taken away from them. And I hope this will be the last year that, students will suffer that way. They deserve, if you work hard, you deserve all the benefits and rewards. And I know many students who've worked very hard only to have that taken away because schools closed and there was no adequate, suitable substitute for them.
I appreciate you talking to me and answering my questions.
Well, thank you. If you have more questions, another opportunity, and I'm sure there'll be more questions as you research this topic more, please feel free to have me back.
All right, thank you.